It's July 5, Ukraine Media Center confirmed continues its operation. My name is Vasyl Samokhvalov, and now we will be talking about the role of the Ukrainian Cossacks as a factor during the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russia. We will talk about it in two aspects. First, how we can segregate this story that was imposed on us within hundreds of years, Ukrainian and Russian Cossacks, how the Russians use it, how we should counter it, and the main thing is how the practices of Ukrainian Cossacks can be used as a support to our Ukrainian troops. So whom are we going to talk about? Major Pavlo Kurylenko, commander of the 20th Detached Special Forces Battalion, Major Volodymyr, deputy commander for morale and psychological support of the 20th Detached Special Forces Battalion, and Vadym Zadunaiskyi, founder of the first Cossack community and expert in Cossack military and martial arts. So I will start with this. In fact, I was studying in the school. I was studying in those by those textbooks where the Don and Zaporizhia Cossacks were meeting in a part of Siversky Donetsk river, and now we see that after the split of the USSR, how the Russians started creating this myth around their Cossacks based on their Cossacks. They started creating this myth in the temporarily occupied territories. So my question is how to explain it from the point of view of the historical, how to explain it to the world, and how to get those two things segregated, and then we'll proceed to the modern troops. So I would like to start with the rebirth of the Cossack traditions back in the 20th. So we created the first institution back in 1984 in Donetsk State University. So analyzing our approach with the other Cossack communities existing in Don or Kuban, we were trying to orient at our military and political traditions that were a part of the Ukrainian regeneration renewal process, and analyzing those events we see how that idea of connection with the Cossacks or adoption of the Cossack heritage warmed our souls, the souls of those who were studying the Ukrainian Renaissance. But even during the Ukrainian insurgent movements, they were tying themselves to those honorable pages of history when Ukraine demonstrated itself what it was. It was the community of free people who defended their community and their homeland. So that tradition was very noticeable even in Ukrainian troops back in centuries 19 and 20. So that young wave of those honoring Cossack traditions was oriented at that. And the Russian Cossack phenomena, it had a number of vectors, and the state-focused vector dominated there in every system, in every pyramid of power headed by the president. Back then it was Boris Yeltsin, later it became Putin. So there were some offsprings there, but they were destroyed there, and as a consequence in Russian Federation they had the dominating Cossack movement, which is fully dependent not on the traditions and customs, not on the national heritage, not even of the family heritage, but dependent on the government institutions. So the registered Cossacks are incorporated in the state structures, and it goes all the way as something submitting to FSB or border guard service or something like that. And since that government infrastructure is being built there in a very strict way, every Cossack movement was put to submit there. So one step aside, the people were ousted from there, the people were formatted, and they actually work as Cossacks. So they have no feeling of connection with their culture. they are transformed into an auxiliary structure for those law enforcement agencies. Do I understand it correct that the main difference is as a difference between the register and siege Cossacks? Well, even the register Cossacks, it was based on Ukrainian traditions, including the military democracy. But again, look, the heads of the Cossack organizations were deputy governors. They were actually appointed. So that element of Cossack democracy, the essence of our view of the world, it was built on the horizontal connections, the feeling of self-sufficiency, the sentiment of self-sufficiency among the equals. It's an elementary model. This is what our tradition was built upon, the protection of the personality among the equal personalities. And now we see, as in temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk region, this tool of Cossacks is used. They are paramilitary unions, and in fact they try to persuade our children in this faith in the Russian Cossacks. And now we understand this profound difference. So I would like to ask how we can use the traditions of Ukrainian Cossacks, how they are used today, and how they are used in your unit specifically, and what can be done to improve the situation. Good afternoon, dear spectators, dear journalists. So how do we use the Cossack sentiment? I'm a battalion commander, and as to the moral and psychological support of the personnel, my deputy will tell you more details, but I'm more curious and I'm practicing the combat, the fulfillment of combat tasks using the Cossack factor. I'll give you a simple example. Just like hundreds of years ago, in the same way 2 weeks ago, our servicemen were able during offensive to overtake the big position of the company of the enemy using the less forces. It tells us about the tactics similar to those used by our ancestors, the Cossacks. In the same way it happens today, using the same tactics, using ruse, using the situations that seem to be insolvable, using the search of the logical solution. This is how the work of the personnel is built, the sergeants and the unit commanders, so that they can analyze the situation around them and not to work systemically, not to work as it's set forth by the book. In Cossack state, always initiative was encouraged. The courage along with the ruse was encouraged, and thanks to those factors, thanks to that synergy of factors, of actions, our units are currently able to fulfill their tasks and to successfully move on. That's clear. Let's give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr. Mr. Volodymyr, can you give us more detail, for example, about what is the number of people serving with your unit, what is their background, and how important it is? You know, as a person who directly works with the personnel, I can tell you that the full-scale invasion, it changed the armed forces of Ukraine completely, because there was mobilization established, and the people were commissioned in the armed forces who really desired to defend their land and their families against the invaders. Very different people. If before that it was mostly contract-based troop that was motivated and trained, in this case the people were yesterday's bakers, journalists, IT specialists, sales managers, specialists from absolutely different areas. They ended up in one place in one period of time, and our task is to work with such people to get them united around the idea of defense of their homeland thanks to Mr. Vadym, we remind them that we all originate from Cossacks. This is who we originated from, who we are, what are our military traditions, and this work with all of the personnel starting from the regular soldier, which is sitting in a trench, and all the way up to the company commander, platoon commander, and commanders of detached units. We remind all of them that, guys, our task is to defend our homeland. We're Cossacks, the Cossacks have traditions, and starting from the Cossack liberties, and starting from the strict subordination and ending with the military traditions such as consecration. As a Cossack, when after the basic Cossack training, a serviceman or a Cossack goes all the way up to being adopted, up to being accepted by the combat unit. This is, I think, where the allegiance is originating from, which is a solemn procedure and which will be remembered forever. And after that, the serviceman and the Cossack has no physical or moral option of betraying his brothers in arms. And the work is built around that. Many people were unprepared, untrained. Many people never thought they would be able to take up the arms. They ended up in front the necessity to look for motivation inside themselves, the motivation to the psychological resilience in the battlefield. So no matter what is the coolest, the most cutting edge weapon coming to the soldier, they use that weapon, they pull the trigger, uh, uh, having that load in the forward edge of the battle area, because everybody who ended up under the mortar fire or everybody who ended up in the combat, they know that as soon as the combat begins, everything changes. You cannot predict it, you cannot know it beforehand what will be the way you would act, and our task is to give the mobilized servicemen those tools using which they will be able to get oriented in the battlefield, using which they can help each other and themselves, and they can guide their personnel. So thanks to the cooperation with Mr. Vadym, this work is underway, and it's underway for 1 year, and thanks to that works, no single serviceman refused to fulfill their duties, and unfortunately such cases exist in the armed forces. No serviceman left the battlefield, and thanks to that we have the encouragement by General Syrskis, the commander of the army. We have the appreciation of the commander of 68th Brigade, and from the commander of the detached presidential brigade, Pavlo. Thanks to the resilient fulfillment of our tasks, our duties by our servicemen. Joining us is Volodymyr Romantsov, professor, doctor of the history at Mariupol State University. We can give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr. Our first question was how to segregate Ukrainian Cossacks from Russian Cossacks that Russia was constantly trying to get us united with, and how do we preserve the Ukrainian Cossack tradition and not to follow Russians who transformed their Cossacks into a propaganda tool. Thank you for this question. It's a very present issue actually in Mariupol. I was unfortunately observing the thing that you mentioned, such an attempt to get Ukrainian and Russian Cossacks united. You know, it was happening specifically during the times when on the stone graves we had an annual commemoration of the battle at Kalka, and some Cossack formations were gathering their representatives, emphasized that they are Slavic based, they are united on a Slavic basis, and so on and so forth. And in the local newspapers, I was coming across the messages that the Don Cossacks in some village near Mariupol were holding a patriotic event in school. And I was thinking to myself, what kind of patriotic event could have been held by a Don Cossacks in a Ukrainian school? So this is unfortunately the cases that used to happen. Obviously, it's not an issue that can be solved quickly. We need some serious fundamental work, first of all, for the to be done by the historians of the Mariupol State University that I'm represented. We were doing that work as to the creation of historical heritage, historical memory on the scientific Ukrainian basis, and I take pride in the fact that about 15 of our historians, the graduates, are currently in different fronts, enlisted in the armed forces of Ukraine in different units. They defend Ukraine, they help to liberate the territories. Unfortunately, recently we've lost one of such graduates of ours on the 1st of April under Bakhmut. A graduate, Danilo Podibalo, perished. A very patriotic young man who is connected to the Cossacks for a reason. We were discussing it recently. We were discussing this heroic and tragic incident, comparing Danilo to a legendary Cossack Mamai of the 17th, 18th century. You know, it was an image back then, the historic Cossack image, the image of the defender of Ukraine, a Cossack with a bandura, a string instrument. First of all, he was a talented musician who performed with the guitar, and as soon as the war erupted, he took up the arms to defend Ukraine. And again, we've bowed our heads to honor the memory of our perished graduate Danilo Podibalo, and quite recently, in June, again there was the state examination. We had some bachelors graduating, and one of them voluntarily got enlisted by the armed forces of Ukraine. He got a diploma from the hands of our rector Mykola Trofimovka, so now he's in a training ground, getting trained. So in principle, those are some Cossack traditions that we try to teach, we try to create the historic memory, and it's important when in conditions like this some historic myths were imposed about the artificial unification. So now we need to transform that historic memory, and obviously this is what we're trying to do now, and we will continue doing that on and on. So let's talk about the Cossack education, Cossack training. My question is to everybody, what should be the system of such indication, to what extent should it be integrated into preschool program, school program, university programs, should it be done on the level of the state program or on the community level. Again, if on a state level, how to make it different from Russia, and what can be integrated into the army, where our military tradition can go in line with the field regulations. Well, you can pass the microphone. So let's start. What should be the country where it exists? We understand the Russian model, the budget finance, camps, and stuff like that. In fact, we had it volunteer based, but if we want to have this tradition reborn, who should be the carrier of this tradition? Who should attend? Well, it's an present issue, but it's a global issue. I would like to emphasize it. There is a whole layer of problems related to the Ministry of Education and other ministries involved in patriotic education. All we have it supported by the government now, the system of education JURA, so-called JURA, and the government finance is allocated. That there is a number of other organizations, but this issue deserves complex analysis. If we invite the specialists from different environments to discuss it, how it's supposed to be happening with their eyes, they have an experience of work on the level of school, on the level of the regional unions that are involved in patriotic education of the youth, and this is when we can discuss it. Well, why I'm asking, because now we're rethinking the patriotic education one way or another, and we will have such subject as protection of Ukraine returned into the education programs. Everything will be rethought again, so maybe it will somehow go in line with Cossack traditions. Well, obviously it goes without saying. First of all, we have to change the planning system, we have to implement the new programs for training, and we have to hold a number of education events for the teachers, because sometimes the teachers are teaching that have very basic training in this regard. Like on the level of physical training teacher, they can teach to the assembly and disassembly of a gun, of a machine gun, but along with that they need to know the history of these organizations like JURA, to take the experience of the generations. So there is a complex of issues to be worked on by the specialists in different areas, starting from historians and ending with the range practice. So the representatives of the armed forces should be involved in this process, in my opinion, because they understand what they want the young warrior to look like, somebody who joins their units. They should be sold at the level of military organizations and the ministries as well. But I would like to draw your attention to not to another area, because it's a topic to a different, it's a subject to a different discussion. But I want to add to what my colleagues have said now that they brought up that issue. If we talk about the Cossack traditions, if we talk about the Cossack military traditions, we can see, as Mr. Pavlo said, on the example of their battalion, their warriors who act in the east and in the south of Ukraine, they inflict damage on the enemy. I would analyze it scientifically. For example, the battle operations in Mykolaiv region and in Kharkiv region, and this is what we can see there, what Mr. Pavlo said, that are whereas at the operational level, I'm operating the available information, the open information, they use the same ruse. That there is a type of ruse that the enemy and we use. In our case, it's 30–40% more efficient than in the case of the enemy, and it's thanks to the initiatives, the stereotypes of thinking, the self-sufficient sentiment, the self-respect sentiment, and the understanding that you defend your land, that you don't come as a mercenary, or you were forced, just like they are forced in Russia, as the sheep. They lay their lives in thousands, but our guys, they have a feeling, the sentiment of their duty and the sentiment of the heritage of the ancestors, plus flexibility, efficiency inherent in Ukrainian mentality and principle of thinking used in the battlefield. And if we take the education and psychological and motivation component, we developed with Mr. Pavlo and Volodymyr about 6 blocks of trainings, of classes, that gradually formulate the understanding of connection between today and the heritage. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that? Well, look, if we work with the servicemen, talking about the mentorship, we demonstrate what are the principles of the mentorship that existed in Zaporizhzhia siege all the way until the World War II, and specific examples, including the experience of Cossacks and their descendants. So it's not pressure over the people, but the handover of experience on a family and friends level. So level of brotherhood, level of friendship, how it worked in centuries 17, 18, 19, how it works during the revolution time, how it works or used to work in Ukrainian insurgency unit. So you explain it to a person. If we talk, say, there is a saying, the good Cossack knows where the Ottoman is. It's a key element when the responsibility for their attitude in the battlefield relies on that specific layout. So we described 7 classic Cossack elements that are specified in the source base, and we relate it to today. It's not like we invented or we do some anachronistic things, but we use the approaches that used to work today, even using the tactical tricks. So I would like to ask people wearing uniforms, how are people who receive Cossack training different from regular people, and how those Cossack liberties go in line with the field manuals of the armed forces of Ukraine? Well, you segregate the Cossack training and regular people, but we are all Ukrainians. It's our ethos. We cannot be either with Cossack training or regular people. We are all here with Cossack training. We are all the descendants of the Cossacks. But the thing is that sometimes we have to remind ourselves about it. As Mr. Zadunaiskyi said, after the decades of pressure from Russia, we had this understanding a little bit eradicated. We had textbooks rewritten that distorted our vision of that. Recently, I was communicating with some of my brothers in arms, the battalion commanders, about why Russians, meanwhile this invasion was planned for more than 5-10 years, why they failed it. And we've come to one simple conclusion. It's about the ethos, the presence of Cossack traditions in Ukraine and their absence in Russia. I'll give you a small example how we came up to this understanding. We have such a grandpa Petro, just a regular average grandpa, and he's very different from Russian Mikhalich by a number of features. When Mikhalich is told to do something, to go somewhere above his status, he does it, and after that he goes and boasts to all other Mikhalichs that this higher official vested some responsibility in him. But our grandpa Petro is different. He's inside his community. In the same way, he has his managers. The managers order him to do something, and he tells that I was vested this responsibility, not like I was sent to someone higher, but he is ready to demonstrate his best sides, he's ready to express himself. And in Cossack tradition, this was the tradition to express themselves in all aspects of life, in any area, in any sector. Why our people are considered or like multi-productive, versatile in all over the world, because we can adapt to any conditions, to any systems, and we can progress in them. And this originates from the Cossacks. This is why our purpose, our goal in the unit is to show that a ranger shouldn't be just a ranger, he should be a versatile soldier. And there are these aspects. First, to remind them of the multitask nature of the servicemen and the brotherhood. Yeah, a couple of days ago I was in our base, and in the smoking area there was a couple, well, three servicemen actually, who were just 3 or 4 days back from the forward edge. When I'm saying from the forward edge, it's like not somewhere, but they were killing the enemies 20 meters away from them. And they say, all three of them were concussed. Two of them underwent medical care, and one of them was still left for another week in the medical facility. And they say, okay, it's time to go. So two of them say it's time to go, and the third one says, well, what about me? We have so much things in common. And he came up to me to ask me to let him go with him, and I tell him, no, you have to stay for 1 week longer. And he says, no, I gotta go. So what it tells me about that, now I don't have three soldiers, I have a coordinated battle unit, a small unit who will fulfill their task under any conditions. And this is the expression of Cossack traditions in our units. Thank you. Thank you. So in continuation of what Mr. Sergey said, you know, this brotherhood sentiment in Cossack troop, it's the community and those who support, who understand each other to the most extent in the battle system, who got closer to each other. They were forming this trinity or couples, pairs. You see, the battalion is made up of those soldiers who covered each other, who protected each other, who were saving each other in the battle. This is the element of brotherhood. So this initiative group can fulfill any tasks in the battlefield, and if our troop is made of properly trained people, of the people who understand that they fulfill their mission for a reason, and they have this feeling in their heart, the feeling of pride, the feeling of glorification of their actions, not only of their own actions, but of the actions of their units, their self-identification with the battle unit, with Ukraine, and their self-identification with the ancestors, just like Taras Shevchenko said, unborn and dead and alive. Yeah, we have to transfer European armies to Cossack standards, now the NATO armies. Well, I categorically support the statement that we are all Ukrainians, and the war is between Russia and Ukraine for the last 400 years. 400 years the totalitarian system wants to break us. They want to spread our national sentiment, national cultures among other captured peoples. Full-scale invasion became a push that let us wake this identity inside ourselves. And why they failed to capture us within 3 days? Because each and every recalled that they're Cossacks and they will stand for their ground until the very end. And that's the first thing. And the second, about the policy of the Cossack traditions and the rebirth of Cossack traditions and their implementation. I would like it to be a centralized government policy, but as our experience demonstrates, for 30 plus years, everything happens in the civil society way better than in the government policies. This is why everyone should remember inside inside their families, who we are, where we originate from. Everybody should educate their kids based on the possibility that, God forbid, something happens. Everyone should be able to use weapons. The weapons should be available to anybody for self-protection, and upon the signal or without the signal, as situation changes, everybody should take up the arms and start defending themselves and their families. So this is the approach, and this is the decentralization that allows organizing during critical moments and to repel any enemy. When the enemy knows that from every window, every house, he will be met by a barrel of a gun, or 2 or 3 barrels, no matter what is the amount of his army, million or 2 millions, he is not going to be able to capture our people. Our examples absolutely corroborate those words. The squad, when people underwent training, when they underwent coordination, when they recalled that they are Cossacks, when they got this historical background which demonstrates how we were beating the enemy during epochs in different battles, no matter whether they were Russians or other enemies, because the enemy can be from outside but also unfortunately from the inside. So we have to learn to get organized, to teach our troops so they can fulfill the task also during the battle, so that they can take decisions knowing the joint task of the battalion and to beat the enemy at their best opportunity. So this practice should be implemented on a mandatory basis in the armed forces, and that's a huge way that would allow us to beat the enemy. Do we have questions on the floor? If we have no questions on the floor, so I think let us wrap up. Or you have any more comments, something important to say? Well, the first thing, I want to thank my colleague, Professor Vadym Zadunaiskyi, for this second year of organizing a very serious international roundtable dedicated to the subject of Cossacks and the war, the traditions, the Cossack traditions in Ukrainian troops. It's a very important problem. It's not only being discussed, but Mr. Vadym also takes a lot of effort to make sure it's implemented as practice, and his connections with the representatives of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the way to what extent he assists the implementation of this system of educating of the new warriors. I mean, Jura, I haven't heard about it in Mariupol, so now I see it, and I hope that after we liberate the city of Russian occupiers, it will be happening in Mariupol too. However, I feel there will be in need of a very complicated work to be done there, because unfortunately many teachers, even the teachers of history, they were just like we call it vatniks. Yeah, everybody understands this word. So unfortunately, this vatnik word was sowing the evil in the souls of the young generations. Thank you. So I think we will be wrapping up here. Very comprehensive. Thank you very much. You're doing a great job, and thank you very much, Mr. Pavlo, for our image of our internal Grandpa Petro. It was a very exact metaphor of our discussion, which proved for an umpteenth time that Ukraine is no Russia. We wish victory to everybody and glory to Ukraine. And I wanted to add that Cossacks will be a spiritual foundation for the generations to come. So long live the Ukrainian Cossacks, long live the Ukrainian armed forces. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.